The year was 1943, and the air over Europe had become a slaughterhouse of steel and fire. Every day, young men climbed into cockpits under gray English skies, not knowing if they'd ever come back. They were fresh out of flight school, boys from the farms of Kansas, from the oil towns of Texas, from the crowded streets of Chicago and New York. Barely old enough to shave, barely old enough to fly, yet the fate of the war rested on their trembling hands. They called them greenhorns. The Luftwaffe had another name for them. Of German aces echoed, cold and cruel. They joked that the Americans were brave, yes, brave enough to fly straight into death every morning. In one American squadron, a young pilot named Jack Reynolds wrote in his diary, "They laughed at us. They said we were flying coffins." Maybe they were right. Jack had flown his first mission over Hanover just 3 weeks earlier. His best friend, Charlie, never made it back. The last time Jack saw him was in formation, his bomber trailing smoke. He disappeared into the clouds, and that was that. They never even found the wreckage. The Luftwaffe seemed unstoppable. Its aces racked up kills that no Allied pilot could match. Erich Hartmann alone, just 21 years old, was closing in on 200 victories. He flew with cold precision, striking from above, vanishing before anyone could react. The Americans called him the Black Devil. The Germans called him Buby, the Kid. To them, air combat was sport. To the Americans, it was survival. But something was changing. The losses were too high. The U.S. Army Air Forces knew they couldn't keep sending bombers into Germany without long-range escort. They needed a fighter that could go the distance, fly to Berlin, fight, and come home again. Engineers back in the States were working on it, quietly, methodically. A new aircraft was being tested, sleek, low-drag, fast as hell. But at the front, no one had seen it yet. Until one cold morning in late 1943. At an airfield in Cambridgeshire, England, a group of pilots gathered around a strange, elegant shape parked on the runway. It wasn't bulky like the P-47, nor twin-tailed like the P-38. It was long and lean, its wings curving gently downward like a bird in flight. Its nose pointed forward with quiet menace. On its tail, stenciled in black, were 4 letters, P-51B. The Mustang had arrived. At first, few believed in it. The early versions had been disappointing. The Allison engine simply couldn't breathe at high altitude. Above 15,000 feet, it wheezed and coughed, a Greyhound forced to run in thin air. But then came a British idea, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Once that was fitted, everything changed. The new Mustang could climb with the best of them, dive like a bullet, and fly higher than most German fighters dared. But the most astonishing thing wasn't its speed or agility, it was its range. The Mustang could escort bombers all the way to Berlin, then back to England on a single tank of fuel. For the first time in the war, the American bombers wouldn't have to fly alone. The Luftwaffe didn't know it yet, but their hunting season was almost over. That winter, the first Mustangs took to the skies in combat. Their arrival went largely unnoticed, until the day German radar operators began to panic. They saw something that shouldn't have been possible. Fighter contacts deep inside Germany, hundreds of miles beyond where any American escort could reach. "Das kann nicht sein," one operator muttered. "This can't be right." But it was. The Mustangs were already there. At 26,000 feet high above the Ruhr Valley, a formation of B-17s droned toward their target. Their crews tensed for the inevitable, the German fighters that always came roaring out of the sun. But this time something else appeared. Silver shapes, slender and deadly, weaving in tight formation above the bombers. The crews didn't recognize them at first. Then the radios came alive. "Don't worry, boys, the cavalry's here." From that day on, the laughter began to fade. The German aces had ruled the sky for years, but they had never faced anything like this. The Mustang could match them turn for turn, dive for dive, and climb away with ease. It was faster, smoother, and carried 6.50 caliber guns that spat fire with surgical precision. Its pilots were still young, still those same boys from the farmlands and cities of America, but now they had the machine they needed. And for the first time, the Luftwaffe was the one flying on borrowed time. In hangars across occupied Europe, German mechanics worked frantically through the night. They painted new camouflage, swapped engines, patched bullet holes. But no amount of repair could make up for what was coming. The sky over Europe was changing. The hunters were becoming the hunted. As one American pilot later said, "We've been fighting with our backs to the wall." But when the Mustang came, the wall disappeared. No one in Germany realized it yet, but the days of the laughing aces were numbered. The sky was about to belong to the Mustang. The winter skies over Europe in early 1944 carried a new sound, a sharper, higher whine cutting through the drone of bombers and the thunder of flak. It was the sound of the Mustang. At first, the German pilots didn't believe what they were seeing. Reports came in from squadrons over Bremen and Hanover. New American fighter, very long range, very fast. But the veterans in their mess halls laughed it off. They had heard it all before. Every few months the Allies claimed some new miracle machine, and every time the Luftwaffe had sent it down in flames. Yet when the first dogfights began, the laughter turned uneasy. The Mustang didn't fight like anything the Germans had faced before. It could dive faster than a 109 and climb almost as well as an FW190. It rolled smooth, handled light, and carried 6 heavy machine guns that shredded anything in their path. German pilots who tried their old tricks, the sudden dive and climb, the spiral, the head-on pass, found themselves caught, chased, and torn apart by the P-51's relentless speed. One ace, Kurt Bulligan, later said, "We couldn't get away. Every time you thought you'd lost one, there he was again, right behind you." The Mustangs came in groups now, not just a handful but dozens, weaving above the bomber formations like guardian angels made of aluminum and smoke. The American crews below watched in awe as the new fighters dove into swarms of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Where once they'd been slaughtered, now they had protection. Radios buzzed with new life. "Bogies coming in high. Mustangs got them. Good shooting, Mustang. You got him." For the first time in months, hope returned to the cockpits of the B-17s. The Germans felt the shift immediately. Gone was the easy hunting of 1943, the confident laughter of the Luftwaffe's aces. Their kills grew harder to find, their fuel scarcer by the week. The Allied bombers still came, but now they came with teeth. Above Berlin, over Leipzig, over the industrial heart of Germany, the sky was filled with silver fighters that didn't turn back. They followed the bombers all the way in, stayed through the chaos of the flak zones, then escorted them home again. It was as if America had suddenly extended its reach across the entire continent. In one mission over Merseburg, German ace George Peter Eder took off with his squadron to intercept an incoming bomber stream. They climbed through cloud and sunlight until they reached 20,000 feet. Below, the endless line of B-17s shimmered in the haze. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Eder signaled to his men, "Attack formation." But as they rolled in, streaks of light flashed from above. Mustangs. Eder had just enough time to shout a warning before tracers ripped through his wing. He rolled, Dove tried to shake the American off. The Mustang followed, matching every move, closing the distance inch by inch. Eder barely made it back to base. His tail was shredded, his fuel tank leaking, and his hands shaking. That night, he admitted to his comrades, "This new one, it is faster than any I've seen." The Luftwaffe began losing pilots faster than it could replace them. The aces still fought, Galland, Barkhorn, Hartmann, but the skies they'd once ruled were no longer theirs. American formations flew deeper into Germany, hitting factories, rail lines, and fuel depots with growing precision. Every week, more of the Reich's war machine ground to a halt. And every week, more German pilots failed to return. At one base outside Hanover, a mechanic watched as his squadron's planes returned from a mission. Only 4 came back. The rest, gone. He looked at his commanding officer and said quietly, "They own the sky now." Back in England, the young American pilots who once prayed before takeoff began to feel something different. Confidence. The Mustang wasn't just a plane, it was a revelation. Its pilots learned how to use its strengths, energy, altitude, and range. They developed new tactics. Instead of staying glued to the bombers, they went hunting. They called it free-roaming escort. Groups of P-51s would surge ahead of the bomber stream, sweeping the skies clean before the Luftwaffe could even take off. Airfields from Hamburg to Munich became death traps. German planes barely left the ground before the Mustangs were on them, strafing runways, fuel depots, hangars, and parked aircraft. For the first time, the hunters had become the hunted. Adolf Galland, the famed Luftwaffe general, watched helplessly as his fighter strength crumbled. By early 1944, he knew the truth. Germany was running out of everything. Fuel was scarce, pilots inexperienced, aircraft production crippled by bombing raids. Even the mighty Me-262 jet, still in testing, couldn't save them fast enough. Galland later said, "The day the Mustangs appeared over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." But on the American side, victory came at a cost. Many Mustang pilots never made it home. Even with the best machine in the sky, air combat was chaos. One burst of gunfire, one mistake, and you were gone. Lieutenant William Tex Coleman remembered his first fight vividly. "I saw a 109 go after one of our bombers. I dove, lined up the shot, fired, saw him burst into flames. Then I realized his wingman was behind me. My canopy shattered. I don't remember pulling the stick, just spinning, and then black. He woke up in a field in Belgium, blood in his eyes, parachute half tangled. He made it back through the resistance lines a week later. When he returned to his unit, there were new faces everywhere. Half the guys I knew were gone, he said quietly. But the bombers were getting through. That's what mattered. Through the spring of 1944, the P-51 became the spearhead of Allied air power. Entire Luftwaffe squadrons were wiped out. Air superiority, once Germany's greatest weapon, now belonged to the Allies. Every day, American Mustangs roamed the skies with bold white and black invasion stripes under their wings, their pilots chasing anything that moved. The Germans tried everything, surprise attacks, low-altitude ambushes, even desperate ramming missions, but nothing worked. The Mustang could outrun them, outclimb them, outfight them. One German pilot, Hans-Ulrich Rudel, famously told his comrades, "You see that long-nosed one with the bubble canopy? Don't even try. Dive for the deck and pray he doesn't follow." He usually did. The Mustang's presence changed the war in ways far beyond the dogfights. Its range meant that bomber raids no longer had to stop short of Berlin or Munich. The oil refineries at Luna, the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, the aircraft factories at Regensburg, all were now within reach. Every successful mission tightened the noose around the German war economy. By the time of D-Day, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. When Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, the air above them belonged almost entirely to the P-51s and their siblings. German tanks tried to move by night. By day they were sitting ducks. The same aces who once laughed at American rookies now watched helplessly as their airfields burned and their homeland came under constant attack. In a letter home, one American pilot wrote, "We used to look up at the sky and think of the Germans waiting for us. Now it's the other way around. They look up and see us." But for the men who flew, there was little joy in the killing. Many had seen too much. Burning parachutes, black smoke rising from fields, voices fading over the radio. Even as victory came closer, they carried the ghosts of those who didn't make it back. In the evening, at bases in England, they sat quietly over tin cups of coffee or whiskey, listening to the distant rumble of engines returning. Every sound in the sky made them look up, waiting, counting. When a plane didn't appear, no one spoke. They just nodded to the empty chair at the table. By summer, the Luftwaffe was fighting its last battles. Most of its experienced pilots were dead or captured. Replacements, boys barely out of flight school, went up in old, patched-together fighters with almost no training. Against the seasoned Mustang pilots, they never stood a chance. Entire German formations were shot down before they even reached altitude. The sky that had once belonged to the Reich was now painted with American stars. The irony was bitter. The same German aces who had once called the Americans greenhorns, now watched their own new recruits die just as quickly. Erich Hartmann himself, the highest-scoring ace in history, once described looking into his squadron's briefing room and realizing that every face was new. The war was eating its own children, he said later. And still, the Mustangs flew, every day, every mission, escorting bombers deeper and deeper until the heart of Germany itself lay in ruins. By late 1944, Allied bombers could hit targets anywhere in the Reich with minimal losses. The P-51 had achieved what no one thought possible: total air dominance. Yet beneath the triumph was exhaustion. For the pilots, the sky had become both battlefield and graveyard. Some found themselves haunted by the faces of the men they'd shot down. One Mustang ace, George Preddy, confessed to his crew chief, "You start to realize they're just like you, scared, cold, trying to get home." Preddy himself would be killed on Christmas Day, 1944, after downing 2 enemy aircraft. He was chasing a third when friendly fire ended his life. The air war had no mercy for anyone. By early 1945, the laughter of the German aces was a memory. Their bases were gone, their fuel gone, their comrades buried. The skies that once echoed with the growl of Messerschmitts now thundered with the song of the Mustang. America had done what even Britain's Spitfires and Hurricanes could not: taken the war to the enemy's heart and broken its wings. As one Luftwaffe officer said after the war, "We didn't lose the air war to numbers. We lost it to endurance, to a plane that could fly forever and a country that never stopped building." In the quiet that followed, when peace finally came, the surviving Mustang pilots returned home, not as heroes but as tired men who had seen too much sky. They went back to farms, to garages, to the small towns they'd left behind. Some never spoke of the war again. Others wrote letters to the families of the friends they'd lost. And in Germany, A few of the old aces who'd once laughed at them lived long enough to see those same young Americans shake their hands in peace. One German veteran, decades later, stood beside a restored P-51 at an air show. He ran his hand along its smooth metal skin, smiled faintly and said in broken English, "When we saw these, we knew it was over." The Mustang had not only conquered the sky, it had ended the age of the Luftwaffe's dominance. The laughter that once echoed above Europe had turned to silence. And in that silence, the world remembered the price of learning to fly too close to death. The return home, the war dragged on into 1944, and though victory finally began to glimmer on the horizon, it came at a cost measured in lives, wreckage, and sleepless nights. The once invincible Luftwaffe had been broken, bled dry over the skies of Europe. Its proud aces, those who had once laughed at the Americans, now found themselves outnumbered, outgunned, and hunted. The P-51 Mustangs ruled the air, their sleek wings slicing across the sky like silver knives. By the spring of 1945, the tables had turned completely. The Germans could barely get their planes off the ground before they were swarmed by Mustangs diving out of the sun. Airfields were bombed, fuel was gone, and the pilots who once mocked the green American boys now flew missions that felt like suicide runs. The legend of air superiority had shifted, from Berlin to the blue skies of the Allied bombers. But for the American pilots who survived, there was no triumph without ghosts. Every mission carried memories of those who didn't make it back. The empty bunks, the letters never sent, the laughter that vanished in smoke. Even after the war ended, the sound of a Merlin engine could send a veteran right back into the cockpit, heart pounding, eyes scanning for a speck in the sky. They were heroes, yes, but heroes scarred by the price of their own endurance. Many returned home to farms, factories, and families, their medals packed away in drawers, their stories untold. Yet in quiet moments, they could still feel the Mustang's vibration through their bones, that wild, steady rhythm of power and survival. They remembered the cold dawn briefings, the taste of metal in the air, the sight of sunlight flashing off distant wings. They remembered the day the Germans stopped laughing. The Mustang wasn't just a machine, it was redemption made of aluminum and fire. It gave the Americans something they hadn't had since the war began, control of the sky and the power to protect their brothers in the bombers below. And it came not just from engineers, but from those who refused to give up, who learned to fight smarter, fly longer, and believe in something beyond fear. The P-51 became a symbol, not of dominance, but of transformation. It was proof that even the greenest rookie could rise against the world's best if he had the courage to climb higher. When peace returned, the surviving Mustangs were shipped back across the Atlantic or sold for scrap. Some ended up in barns, forgotten under tarps. Others were turned into racing legends, their engines screaming once more, not for war but for glory. And a few, the lucky few, were preserved, polished, and flown again by those who wanted to feel the past roar beneath their hands. Today, when one of those Mustangs takes to the air, people look up. They hear the growl of that Rolls-Royce Merlin, the song of victory and sacrifice, and for a moment, the sky remembers. It remembers the laughter of the German aces, the fear of the rookies, the fire that filled the clouds. It remembers the day boys became men and men became legends. The Mustang was more than a fighter. It was the heartbeat of an army, the edge of hope in a world gone dark. And though decades have passed, its echo still rolls across the open airfields and quiet museums of the world. The veterans who are still alive, their hair silver now, their hands trembling, sometimes stand beside those gleaming machines and smile. Because they remember what it meant to fly one. They remember being 19 and invincible, feeling the world tremble under the power of 1,600 horses. They remember diving through flak and fire, chasing shadows, fighting for men they'd never meet again. They remember the laughter, the mocking, the arrogance, and they remember the silence that came after. The silence of victory and loss and everything in between. One old pilot once said, "The Mustang didn't just win the war. It saved our souls." And maybe that's true. Because somewhere high above the clouds, where the sky burns white and endless, the ghosts of those young flyers still chase each other through the sun. Forever 19, forever free, forever soaring on the wings of the P-51 Mustang.